Friends, it's good to see you. It's so good to be with you this noontime today. We're just a few minutes after, so those that were getting here might still get here. We might have one or two others come in. So glad that you are joining us. I thought for our prayer today, our kind of opening frame, I was just filled this morning with one of my favorite songs. It's a classic hymn of the church, and so I thought I would just share you the first and last stanzas of this. Please do not worry, you do not have to flee the room. I will not try to sing it, okay? Preaching is my giftedness, singing is not. But let me just tell you the lyrics. I think you'll know the song for those of you who've been around the church for a while. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme and glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I have loved so long. Okay? Laura knows, but y'all please remind her I want that at my funeral. Okay? I love that song. The reason I picked that today is it dawned on me I have preached every one of the little stories in this series part we're in, where the next couple of chapters, and every one of them was 20 to 25 minutes long, friends. I cannot do that today in the 30 minutes we have together. So as we do it, I'm going to be moving a little bit more quickly. I will probably, because for the last 2 weeks, I've been helping, but other people have been preaching. I'm going to cross over into preaching, okay? Some of these stories just lend themselves to that. But if I start going too long, don't be afraid to just, point to the watch or whatever, so I get there. But I can guarantee you I'll go right now probably to about 12:30, 5:40 at the minimum. I'll try to wrap it up as close to that as I can, okay? We're going to remind you of just a couple of basics real quick. You've seen this slide before. Don't be tempted to make the Bible boring. If you came here to be bored or go asleep, you're in the wrong place, okay? Don't be tempted to stay in our world. It's a different time and a different world we're looking at. Travel with me. You're going to get some frequent flyer miles today, not in the distance covered in the story, but in the distance between here and there. And then the other thing is, don't miss God. God is on full display in this, and God's love for the world is being revealed through it. So hold on to those items. I raised the question last week. It's going to be a centerpiece of kind of looking at Luke. It's the question that every gospel writer had to answer, and that is, why was Jesus killed? You're going to get some important clues this week on the way through that story of kind of exploring it. I also want to give you some groundwork this week. I thought if I show you some of the places and thoughts before we jump in, even if I have to like kind of paraphrase some parts of the stories, you can go read the stories. You'll still have the rich kind of background material to help out. But I want to show you a couple of things going on in Luke here. Okay, the first thing is the calling pattern is going to be disrupted. Now, when I say the calling pattern, I haven't really defined that for you, so let me tell you what it is. Here, in fact, let's just demonstrate how it happens, right? Jesus walks up to somebody, and he says what? It's on the screen, right? You got it right there. Follow me, right? And what do they say? What do they do? What's their response? They drop everything and follow Jesus. Y'all have heard that before, or you've read the Bible before. How many exceptions to that rule are there?
The guy who wants to bury his father.
Right, guy who wants to bury his father. Rich young ruler who we don't know what he does. Right? It's kind of left unresolved what happens. There's a few times it happens. Today is something where we see that it also happens differently than that. It's very fascinating. but it's an important pattern. I'm also going to show you that Luke puts that there for a reason. Luke wants to challenge your sensibilities about who is in and who is out of the kingdom of God. So get ready. The other thing is there's going to be an escalation through healings. A lot of us, when we read healing stories, the first thing that pops to mind is, why doesn't that happen today? Or why isn't that happening to me? Or something very personal. I want you to look at the stories a little bit differently in Luke's kind of telling of it. I want you to follow with me and see how there are different people at each of the healings we'll experience in chapters 5 and the beginning of 6. And I want you to see why that matters as to why they are trying and how they're trying to kill Jesus. Okay, because you're going to see this kind of escalation through these 3 healing stories. And I want to kind of pull that out for you. What is a scribe and what is a Pharisee? If you don't know those terms, when we get here today, it'll be very confusing. A scribe is a human Xerox machine. Okay? A Pharisee is a religious leader and member of a Jewish sect known for their strict adherence to the law of Moses. They are not known for their creativity or their overt demonstrative compassion. Unlike the Sadducees, they're not sellouts, though. So the Pharisees love Jesus. Like, he's their guy. He gets up, he speaks the law, he says it like it is, and they hope that he is the one that they have hoped for. He is also a person who was baptized by John the Baptist like they were, and they are hopeful that he's one of theirs. So the people we hate the most are turncoats. People who we thought were our kind of representative, the one who embodied every virtue we thought, and that turns out they're not. It's a problem, okay? So these 2 things you're going to see there. Do you think the Xerox machines have a great personality? I mean, they might, back before I knew Laura, I danced with somebody at a place called Dance Across Texas back in Austin. I wasn't a preacher yet. I was just a young college student. And I danced there, and we were dancing, and she was a co-ed at the University of Texas, and she said she was going to be an accountant. And I said, "Oh, you plan not to have a personality?" And she said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I told her what I was studying. And she says, "Oh, you plan to be unemployed." And so she got the best of me, but that was way back. I wanted to show you one of those human Xerox machines. These pictures, both of them, are from the same place at the top of Masada. Masada is kind of like the Alamo for Israel, where the Maccabean, I won't get into all the history of it, but if you don't know about it, I can tell you a lot more about it than you ever will. I could do a whole lecture just on Masada, but I won't. But this is on the top of Masada. You see what he's doing there? You see he's writing, bent over, hunched over, doing that. If he misses a single jot or tittle, that's like a dot or a cross line. If he misses any of those in the text, he has to start over and burn the vellum he's writing on. Okay? Attention to detail and strict adherence to it is very important, but that's what he does 8 hours a day, every day of the week up there, okay? Over here to the left, I wanted to show you a picture of what a first century, more close to what a first century synagogue would have looked like. It would be a place where there would be a place for standing up front for reading, and then people would sit on the steps around for the discussion and even for the preaching of the Torah. It was interesting this past week in some of the sermons, people had obviously not listened to my Bible study to really tell them that the part of what really concerned the people in the synagogue was that Jesus sat down and spoke authoritatively. He did that by sitting down. You're going to see another scene today where, again, Jesus sits down and speaks authoritatively, okay? Because rulers sat and other people either stood or sat around the edge and then interacted This is how courts were held back then. It wouldn't be until the Protestant Revolution, kind of Protestantism and the Reformation, that people then would stand to preach and teach. I want to remind you just quick with this quick glance at Capernaum. It is a city that has very small streets and causeways and all that. So when all the traffic of the ancient world gets diverted there to be among these streets and in these byways and places, you can imagine the kind of closeness that keeps. So how many of you have just one doctor? Anybody? Right? Remember, they don't have doctors. When you hear that someone can heal, they're going to him, friends, in the ancient world. So these streets and all this, it's going to be as if I-10 were diverted through Sabine Pass. Okay, because this little town, that's this little rough fishing village, is going to be overflowing with all the traffic and people of the ancient world trying to get help. I've been there. I just wanted you to see that real quick. But no, really, y'all didn't laugh at that. I work on this all week, guys. But I want to show you that, you see where I'm standing there? You see how rocky it is? I mean, it's not like Texas's coast. Additionally, you see the hills and the mountains behind me. The water gets deep very quickly as it goes off the shoreline, and it makes a steep natural amphitheater. And in one of the stories today, right there at the beginning of chapter 5, that's going to be really important. All right. You ready? So I mentioned he's going to challenge the understanding of the calling, and then we're going to have some escalating stories where we get the escalation through healings of the kind of conflict between Jesus and the authorities. Y'all ready for those two things? All right. So there's the calling of the good disciples. I mean, good working people. It's amazing. They're called, they're fishermen continuing their daily work. If you read right there in chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, what you're going to see is that these people are there and Jesus begins teaching. Did I mention that everybody came to town and they were pressing on Jesus? So Jesus couldn't stay in Capernaum proper. He kind of goes out onto the shoreline. Now, I want you to think about that shoreline. That shoreline has some boats that have kind of been pushed up on the shore in the morning. And then there are people, fishermen out there doing their nets. The ones we would not expect to be there are the ones Jesus lives with. Did you remember that he went to Simon Peter's house? And who did he heal? His mother-in-law. Friends, wouldn't that be enough? I mean, if somebody came into your house and healed, okay, not if you don't like your mother-in-law. I'm very blessed by mine. I love her. She's a second mom to me. And if somebody came in and healed Gloria, oh my gosh, what can I do? How can I be at your beck and call? Let's go. That's amazing, right? And instead, what are they doing? They're tending and mending their nets. They're going through their daily motions. They're doing what they've always done. The crowds keep pressing so that Jesus can't even be heard because they're all pressing upon him. There on that beach that I had a picture of, it makes a natural amphitheater. You remember that I mentioned that? Right? So Jesus, thinking, says, let me get on a boat and be able to speak because it will be a natural Odeon, a place where you can hear everything. And they had those in the ancient world. And so he mentions this to Simon Peter, who a bit annoyed. And Lord, don't you know we've been out fishing all night and we're just getting off our shift? And now you want me to go back out on the water. Okay, mountain boy. He kind of, in the Greek, he almost mocks him from being from Nazareth. Okay, sure. You want to do that, boss? Let's go. So he goes out in the water, and there on the water, we're told, and here, let's just take it there. We're in 5:1. He was standing beside Gennesaret, the crowd addressing to him. 2 boats on the shore. Fishermen had gone out and then were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats belonging to Simon, asked him to put out a little way from shore, sat down and taught the crowds. When he finished speaking, Hold on. Did you almost miss that, didn't I? Right? He did what? Oh, before he's finished speaking, he did what? Sat down. He sat down. Okay, that's odd. I'm not sure what's going on with this. I'm going to try that again. And we've got a little screen issue, but we'll get it fixed. Is that better? That's the second time that's happened. But he sits down there, and what ends up happening is with him sitting down, he now speaks with authority from there on the boat. You then have this interaction with Peter, who's annoyed when he's asked to put his nets further down. And when their nets were about to burst because of all the fish they filled up, they had to call a second boat over. And when they call the second boat over, right, it's after this, out of that bounty, that then we have Simon Peter confessing. Okay, and that's going to be found in chapter 5, verse 8. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. That's the Jesus I know. That's the Jesus I've seen and experienced, is one who meets people where they are, as they are, with something that so overwhelms them that then they can't do anything but respond. I don't know that Jesus often that you just walk up to him and everybody drops everything and just follows, right? I know a Jesus in my experience of ministry where people are inspired to follow by what God has done in their life for them, with them, and through them to make a difference in the world. And so I just want to encourage you here to say, I think that there might be a reason that Luke kind of brings this to our attention. One of the traditions of the church is that Luke had special access to Mary. Do y'all remember me talking about that a little bit? Okay. Mama knew better than they just put everything down and followed her boy. She had not forgotten that they were mending the nets while her boy was up there teaching, preaching, and healing and all that, and probably shared that story. But I will go beyond that to say, I think Luke has a little more to the story, and I think you'll see it here in just a minute. Let's keep going. The first healing. Did I mention there are going to be healings that escalate? Right? You're going to see this one. This healing happens in verse 12, and it says once. So when? Once. And then where was it? Can anybody read that text and see where it was? In one of the cities. Luke, are you kidding me? Come on. Help a brother out. I'm trying to figure out where this happened and what's going on. Once upon a time in a city that was there.
One of the towns.
Oh my gosh. What's going on here? Well, I think that what we're supposed to know, and guys, I'm having a heck of a time getting this TV to work. Do you mind restarting the TV, Chidi? Would that be possible? Can you turn it off and turn it on for me? And we'll see if we can't get it to go that way. Maybe if we reboot it once, because it's losing my connection. It's not staying connected, so I'm not sure what's going on. But all that to say, this kind of goes on in this one place. And I think the reason that that's there, that it's so ambiguous, is because Luke doesn't want us to think this is a typical Roman thing to do when you're telling a history. If you want to tell a story that shows you the meaning of a bunch of other stories, and you just want to tell it one time, you make it have a generic location and setting. And it's a story that symbolizes the other. So I'm not saying the story didn't happen. I'm just saying the reason Luke chooses this approach to present it this way is because he's wanting to show you not an exhaustive list of all the times times Jesus healed, we heard that already that at one point he started healing in the evening and went to after sundown, and then ended up the next morning surrounded by other people who wanted to be healed. So if he told all the stories, we would be here till tomorrow, right? I mean, so he's kind of shortening that, but he's trying to give us an approach. Now, what I want you to look at here is in this story, when you read this little part, who is there? Who is there? You're going to notice that there's a man with skin disease, and he begs Jesus to make him clean. Okay, if you have an older translation, it'll probably say a leper. If you have a newer translation, it will go to great lengths to avoid defining him by his disease. And so it will do a lot of gymnastics in its verbiage. But just so you know, it's just the point is somebody who needs to be made clean. He begs Jesus to make him clean. And he says, if you willed it, Jesus, it would happen. And Jesus says, I do so will, or I do so desire to do so, and does so. And Jesus orders the man not to tell anyone, but follow the law. So don't tell anyone. I don't want you going back home and just spreading it all around, but go show yourself to the priest, and as Moses commanded, make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them. And you can see that in 5:14, so do what you're supposed to. Now, how do you think that goes when a known leper comes back and is healed? Right? There's celebration, there's joy, and then the priest finds out somebody did it. What's going on? How is that so? How is that possible? So there is rejoicing, but there's going to be a kind of a bit of a question mark, an inquiry. What happened? There's a second healing. It begins next here. And in this healing, the Pharisees and teachers of the law from the whole world are there. But let's see. It says that in verse 17, one day while he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby. And let me just be clear. When I say from all around, they had come from every village of Galilee and Judea, and even the feds from Jerusalem had come down to see what was going on. This was more than the Texas Rangers could handle. Right? They're bringing everybody in to see what's going on. So you get the feeling that there's something going on. Well, they're there in this little place. Men come carrying a paralyzed man. Why? He can be healed. Isn't that awesome? That's right. And but there's no way to bring him to Jesus because of the crowd. I mean, you saw the picture of the streets I showed you. This little dirty fishing village, all built, there, just a few people. You get a couple hundred people, and suddenly you can't get anybody in there. So they climb up on the top and they break through the roof. Now, friends, it's not a rain place like here, so the roof is a little bit less than what we have. It would have been kind of mud put together on the top with some, not a lot of wood, but a lot of hay and other stuff that would kind of make a thing, and it's a kind of type of concrete and brick construction that you would have had it. Also, too, taking him up on the top, he would be going into the place where they have their bedrooms. I mean, that's where people sleep up on the top. How many of y'all have ever been in a house where you went upstairs because it was too hot on the bottom floor? Old Texas houses were built with cross ventilation, and you wanted a second story if at all possible, because up there you could open the windows and you would catch any breeze that was available. But other than that, it was just miserable because of the heat. Well, Holy Land's about the same latitude, so you get a very similar kind of feel. So they sleep at night up on the top, unless it's winter, and then they're down with the animals. But up on the top there, so they're taking him up there, and now they're kind of stripping this back to lower him down. In Luke's account, it's just a touch different. He sees their faith, and he forgives the man's sins. Okay. Now, for those of you who are questioning infant baptism and how do we count the faith of the people gathered for a baby who can't answer for themselves, I mean, here's a situation where Jesus heals someone and extends a blessing in the forgiveness of sins. How? Right? Based on their faith. The man couldn't respond. But we don't deny Jesus to someone just because they can't respond, right? We take them to the Lord. And kind of an important text, but I can do another lecture on making sure you argue infant baptism out of the scripture instead of other places. But anyway, that's a whole topic for another day. But here, this faith forgives the man's sin. Did I mention the Pharisees and the scribes are there? Or the Pharisees and the teachers of the law for all over? They're of course, a bit taken by that. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And this is found in verse 21. Who is this who is speaking blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? All right, for them, Jesus is blaspheming because he is claiming to do something that only God can do. When Jesus perceived their questions, he answered them. Why do you raise such questions in your heart? Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven you, or to say, stand up and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the one who was paralyzed, I say to you, stand up and take your bed and go to your home. Immediately he stood up before them, took what he had been lying on, and went to his home, glorifying God. Amazement seized all of them, and they glorified God and were filled with awe, saying, we have seen strange things today. Indeed, indeed. You know, one of the things we don't think about in these stories is that when Jesus heals one of these people, it impacts the entire community. One of my favorite stories from my experiences with Laura was when she went to the mission that we now are involved in over in Fiji, and they healed a Methodist preacher who had been unable to see, and they helped him with cataract surgery so he could see again. And when Laura was checking out of the hotel, there at checkout time, one of the ladies behind the counter there sat there and said, are you the Americans? You healed our preacher. The whole village is rejoicing because he can do his work again. Like, we forget how intertwined in our modern world every person is in the ancient world or an agrarian culture, and how important that is. So this healing had an impact and effect that was beyond the individual. Jesus heals the man. The Son of Man has authority. They were all amazed and glorified. And they kept saying, we've seen incredible things. The people wanting to do Jesus harm are in awe. Oh, then Jesus says something really weird. You thought that was something. A little healing, he's the God who created the heavens and the earth. Healing somebody is no thing. But then Jesus goes and calls a bad guy. Like a really bad guy. He worked for the IRS. Oh, no, even worse than that, he worked for a tax. Imagine if our IRS agents were incentivized to withhold more, to take more of your money. That's what that was at the time. Levi's a tax collector. Jesus sees him at a station and says, follow me. Okay, so Luke, isn't there a story? We had these perfectly good, faithful fishermen who are in synagogue all the time, and you're staying in their house. They had a story before they understood. But that's not what happens here. Sometimes the people in the deepest sin are the most likely to directly repent because they know how bad their estate is in their situation. John Wesley has a sermon that he brings home with this. He says, I envy the thief on the cross over the sinner in the pew because the sinner in the pew doesn't think they need to repent. Yeah. Don't you love Wesley? Kind of calls it like it is, right? So here you have this kind of understanding of the tax collector. He knew he needed to follow. He knew what he needed to do, and he does that. I don't think it's an accidental kind of positioning of these two stories. Luke is showing us that in his experience of leading people and including people who others would leave out, that sometimes the one who is most on the margin is the most likely to follow Jesus and drop everything. It's a beautiful thing. And then, in case you didn't think that was the point, you thought, oh, Pastor Brad's just trying to make up all this kind of crazy stuff, let me call your attention to verse 32. We can read a little bit. We'll go back to verse 30. The Pharisees and the scribes were complaining to his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." Hey guys, good to see y'all. God, bye. Good to see you. Sorry, we got a little group going by there. And he said, but then Jesus says this most important statement, "I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Friends, that's the same message he gave back in the synagogue in Nazareth. It's why they wanted to kill him. And now the scribes and the Pharisees want to kill him too. I didn't come for you. I came so that you might get off your rear and believe and do what you said you were going to do. What God put you here to be. If you take on the mantle of being the people of God, you got to go. It's amazing. Then there's some questions about praxis. I'll let you kind of read through these. John's disciples fast and pray, but you guys eat and drink. What's up with that? You cannot make wedding, and Jesus' response, you cannot make wedding attendants fast while the bridegroom is with you. Can you? He tells the parable of you can't put the wine in wineskins. If I've got enough time at the end, let me tell you a story about that, but that'll just be a bonus story. We might make that the first question. Pastor Brad, tell me of your experience in making wine. Okay. Jesus feeds his hungry disciple on the Sabbath. The Pharisees are like, what are you doing? You're walking through this field on the Sabbath and you're taking grain off and you're giving it to people. And he's like, oh, haven't you read what David did? Okay, it's bad enough he said he's God. Now he's saying he's David? Like, what's up with that? Right? It's really fascinating. The Son of Man, I've done this so that it'll be known that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That the Sabbath serves us, not the other way around. This is their worst fear realized, especially for the Pharisees. Jesus is claiming to do things only God can do and making decisions that mean he's not just one of theirs, he's something outside what they were expecting. Then we get this third healing. And friends, read it carefully. It's at the beginning of chapter 6. But here what you're going to see is it's on the Sabbath. It's another Sabbath. Jesus is again, as was his custom, teaching in the synagogue, right? It's where he is. The scribes and Pharisees are looking to bring an accusation, and there just happens to be, just conveniently, everybody, the Pharisees and the scribes and all these people, and oh, hey, look, we got a guy with a withered arm. Funny. I mean, how many times had they known about this guy? How many times had they been around him? Contrast this with the friends who carried a man on a mat to Jesus out of love. Here that we're told they're trying to catch Jesus. I mean, listen, it's a setup. It says here in chapter 6, verse 1, one Sabbath while Jesus was going through the grain fields, that's the wheat. Chapter 6, verse 6. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he could cure on the Sabbath so that they might find an accusation against him. They're out to get him. Even though he knew what they were thinking, he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come and stand here." Brought him to the center. Let's be clear, everybody look what we're doing. He got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy it? Friends, where is your compassion? Do you care about this man? Think about what is being asked. After looking around at all of them, they didn't reply. They didn't speak up. Jesus is just staring at them. And he says, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. I mean, think about being so consumed with fear and rage that you would want to destroy the works that were helping other people. I'm not trying to be political, friends. But, it's a sad day. Jesus brings the man to the center and heals him. They were filled with fury and had to destroy Jesus. So what does this mean for us? We got a few minutes. Oh, I did it. It's 12:40. Right on time. Jesus calls people out of their old lives and into something new in each of these stories, right? What would it look like for you to step into a new path in this new season with Jesus? Just a question for reflection. Which story in this passage spoke to you the most about trusting God for something new? I mean, there were, a half dozen stories we just shared together, all about trust and about something new. And so I hope one of those spoke to you. And then what is one specific step you can take this week to align your life more fully with Jesus' call? I'm a big fan of doing things. Do you know that what they say about most ideas? If you don't actually take a note about it or write it down within the first minute after the idea comes in, it like diminishes greatly. It's like 80% less likely to actually happen. And so if you get inspired by something that we said, make a moment, write it down, and look at what you can do. All right. Well, we'll kind of end it there. Does anybody want to hear the story about making wine? Yes. All right. So Laura and I were young and married many years ago. It's about 20 years ago, wouldn't it be? And a buddy of mine and I had this great kind of delusion of grandeur that with no money we were going to make wine and do this cool thing. So we went out and we met with a guy named Ken Gilstrap. He had Texas Hills vineyards back when they were first starting to plant some grapes out in the hill country and all. And we went out there and met with him, and we helped him pick grapes, and he gave us a bunch of must. And he said, you know, Brad, if y'all want to become rich winemakers, what you do is you start with millions and millions of dollars, and then you quit as soon as you can. So we learned a lot with that. But we go out there and we get this must together and all this. And so I've got about 5 gallons of all the stuff for wine. And he gives us the kind of yeast you need to make it and mix it. And I've got all the different kind of glass containers and chemistry set stuff I need to put this together. So I decided we were living in this little 2-bedroom apartment, and so we had a little hall toward the entryway, and we'll put it there in this little kind of hallway, and it has a little linoleum floor and all that, and it's all good, and we're supposed to let it out, what they say, outgas and stuff. Well, about 2 a.m. that next morning, we wake up to a pungent odor of very distinct and unique. I would smell it. I mean, I don't know, I've smelled it since, but if I recognized it, I would know exactly what it was. And have y'all ever seen one of those old movies from the 50s called The Blob? And there was on this linoleum this kind of blob that it had outgassed so much that it had pushed the door on the closet open, and now the blob had poured out of the 5-gallon bucket and was slowly making it to ruining our deposit by getting on the carpet. And so I grabbed some towels and got it all contained. We moved it over. It ended up making about 2 full 5-gallon carboys, big glass containers worth of wine, because it outgassed and expanded so much that the volume just grew and grew and grew. It was very impressive to see what it did. So when they say you don't put new wine in an old wineskin, I understand why now, because that stuff expands and expands. Now, of course, Jesus' wine didn't have the levels of alcohol or yeast that we do. It didn't outgas as much. but it still did. And so it would burst anything that it's put in that it couldn't hold. Okay? No extra charge for that. That was just a little bonus. But I made my time by putting that on the end. And we did save the deposit, and I had to clean it all up. Yeah.
Was Levi, the tax collector, a Levite?
Yeah, was Levi a Levite? I would imagine so, yes. I don't have any other reason to know. It's kind of interesting. Matthew has a different name for that tax collector. Matthew. Right? So it's kind of an interesting... So either we have multiple tax collectors that Jesus called, or we have Luke referring to him by his tribe name as Levi as a nickname, and then Matthew. The other thing with Luke that's really fascinating is you're going to see Simon, Peter, and Peter all referred to. And they're the same person. Peter is the nickname Jesus gives to Simon. Okay? And it's not necessarily a good one. It becomes a good one. But at the beginning, he means he's a rock. Like a knucklehead. You know, he's hard-headed. He's a rock. But then he becomes the rock upon which I'm going to build my church. So Jesus' nicknames are there. But the thing I hope you get to, I mean, because I think that's important, you know, this kind of Levi that follows. But what we should notice, though, about Matthew is he was hated by his own people, and he's excluded from people. So he jumps at the opportunity to be community. Okay? He's left out and excluded intentionally. So when there's an opportunity to be part of something, of course he wants to be part of it. You have these other men that are already part of something, and they can't let go of their own need to provide for themselves and their families and really trust that God can do everything they need. Now, another angle I want to go at on the fisherman part too, it does seem that Jesus loves fishermen. If you don't believe me, read John chapter 21 in the story after the resurrection. And he appears to Peter again, and there's the whole Forrest Gump moment. But anyway, it's a cool story. But if we go back into this, though, there is something else. I mean, what university, what professor with a decent repertoire, what even community college person is going down to? Let's pretend. I'm going to try to do this here. Let's pretend that a professor from Yale flew down to Houston and then decided to go to Morgan City or to Intercoastal City and to scout out the Roughnecks. And he's going to pick out 5 that he's going to build his church on. I mean, that's what happens in the story. God, having all of humanity in any time and place, chooses this group of people, this kind of motley crew of fishermen, to become his first followers and disciples upon whom he's going to build his church. It's a little pain in the brain. But what universities do, right, I mean, rightly so, is when they get more people applying than can go, they create standards, and you have rules and regulations. I mean, so it's very unusual that in this time, for even as long ago as this was, for the rabbi or the teacher to go seek the students. That's a very odd thing. That's not consistent with anything else going on in the first century in any of the Near Eastern cultures. I'm not a pro at the other cultures around them, but I do know in the Near East that was not a thing. So that's kind of unique to Jesus. Yeah.
I wonder about when these men left their ways of earning a living to follow him. Whatever happened? Wouldn't their families be destitute?
Yeah, what happens to their families when they leave everything to follow Jesus? Do they become destitute? What happened to them? So far, no, I haven't become destitute, so I'm doing okay. But I would say Yeah, what we get in the story is they seem to have gone with them.
Both families.
Right. So what we get in the story, especially once they're there in Jerusalem. Remember when there's that group of about 120. Those are also, they have their families around with them. We also get a situation too where when you're telling the story of the kind of on the day of resurrection, when they go to expect to find Jesus in the tomb, it's some of the women who went with them. So there's every reason to believe that the families that they had as they went with them in this journey. So when we think of Jesus, it's not just 11 guys walking around with the Lord. There's a gaggle of people. It is a massive entourage. It's a huge mass of people. In fact, when you go to the Holy Land with me sometime, what is so amazing is like when you're standing there and you kind of go on that first kind of turn that you make as you're nearing the Sea of Galilee, that Lake Gennesaret, that freshwater body that's there, that Tiberias is on the one side and Capernaum's over here, and then on the far side you have the Golan Heights and the beautiful space where the Gerasene shore would have been and the other cities of the Decapolis. When you kind of come down and begin that descent, because it's way below sea level and you're headed way down there, what's so kind of beautiful about it is you see that is that you get the feeling that what was going on is somebody would go out on a boat in the Sea of Galilee. You get Jesus always trying to get away from all this crowd that's following him. But you get a feel like when you read the text again, that it was like there was this mob of ants that just, whichever way Jesus went, there they went. And then they were all just trying to run around. And the truth is when you're there, the winds are not always friendly to those on the boat, on the sea there. And so it is sometimes where a boat is out there in the middle and it would have just stopped in the ancient times. So you'd either had to have an oar or some other propulsion to move it. So yeah, everybody's running around to get to where, if he's out there and they came from there, they're going over there. So then they all run over there, so that's why there's this crowd around Jesus all the time. But I think that crowd also included family. So. Mm-hmm. There are some times where Jesus does take his disciples off by themselves, but I think that also implies to us that there were all this other group around them. Yeah. But great question. Yeah, Wayne?
Do you think that Jesus called some people and they didn't come, and Luke just doesn't record that?
Yeah, I mean, did Jesus call people that didn't come? Well, yes, very much so. And they don't always respond. Again, I'm always careful with the rich ruler who comes to Jesus and asks questions, because the truth is the text doesn't tell us what he did. It just leaves us in a kind of uncomfortable place. But some of us are like that person, and I don't want people to think that they're beyond responding, right? So it's out of pastoral concern. But there are several parables that make it very clear that Jesus' call was much more broad than would seem. And there's time and time again where he's very clear about, like, the wedding guests at the party, that they said, we set out a banquet and we had everything we needed. We got there and none of the guests that were invited showed up. They were all too busy. So we went out onto the street and we gathered up anyone we could find. I told the servants to just get anyone, but one showed up not dressed for the party, so I sent them away with gnashing of teeth. Right? I mean, right? So I mean, that's just the words of Jesus. So I don't think those are just pulled at random. I think that's because he would do that. Also, to the end of it's Matthew will tell us. I believe Matthew 25. That idea that when did we know you, Lord? When were we? I mean, so some people don't respond. I think Luke's axe to grind, though, if I can bring it back to Luke, is Luke's axe to grind is they should know. And sometimes it's the people who should know, who think they know more than they do, that kind of get in trouble. There's a proverb, I won't necessarily, well, I mean, I guess I can attribute it. It's actually a Muslim proverb. It goes, follow those people seeking God. Beware of those who claim to have found him. Sometimes people thinking that their routine is saving them miss the living God in faith. That's all. Too, like, I love funerals where I hear how good a person was and what they did. It's really cool to give a testimony to a life. But I'd never let a funeral go without talking about a person's faith, because it's the grace of God that saves us, not what we do. Now that, again, faith without works is dead. Don't hear it wrong. But it is actually God that does the heavy lifting. And I hope that gives you cause for joy. For me, that's the happiness, because I can only live so much. It's kind of good to know what God can do. So, yeah, I think the thing with Luke that's so, I don't know, I think it's really pretty awesome. Luke really kind of is trying to demonstrate for Theophilus through these three stories, not every story of healing that Jesus would have done, but a set of stories that will explain, one, why did they want to kill Jesus, and two, how everything Jesus did was so intentionally compassionate that he didn't care about what the people around him are going to do. And we live in a time right now where there are some peculiar-headed Christian philosophers who are arguing against compassion as a part of love. Empathy is the enemy. I mean, are you kidding me? Have they read I don't know how you read the Old or New Testament without it at the heart. So, what kind of God comes to earth and lives among us and becomes a servant? But it's because of the great cuss word in our culture today. Do you want to hear it? Can I cuss for y'all? You ready? I'm going to say it. Be careful. Humility. Don't say it, and definitely don't show it, because people think it's a sign of weakness. But it's our greatest strength. It's our super weapon as followers of Jesus. Other questions? I'll start preaching. You better be careful. I got about 4 more minutes, and then I've got a staff announcement we have to share.
Do you think that Jesus deliberately chose people who were free of institutions because they were probably more likely to leave what they were doing and go? It's the people who were holding on. Like, I heard a Bible teacher sometime use Presbyterian every time he got to the word Pharisee in Scripture. I was like, okay now.
Yeah. Well,
I'm a Presbyterian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Us Methodists could put the same word in there, but let me repeat the question for those online. So the question is, did Jesus intentionally choose people who were outside of some of the systems of the day to be able to bring them in and do that? Kind of. Certainly that's there. I don't know. I like to think Peter was really chosen, especially Peter, for his tenacity. And that would be needed. Because if I go that route whole hog, like I kind of want to, the truth is, then what do I do with Paul? Because you don't get more on-board establishment than Paul, and yet his knowledge and education is going to be exactly what you need. It's going to pay huge dividends in the writing of most of our New Testament, right? So Paul's the insider of insiders, right? So he gets his mind. So, I guess what I'm going to try to say here is, God could have called who God willed. I'll spend a lifetime trying to reflect on why he called which one. But I will say it is interesting to me. It was actually Dr. Elaine Heath, a dear friend and a person I just admire a great deal. She brought this to my attention. All the harsh critique Jesus gives are for the religious people who should know better. The critique of the non-believer, the people outside, are almost none. It's all compassion. And I find that fascinating. It might be a lesson for us. I hate to say, serving as a pastor, I've experienced times when people weren't filled with compassion and didn't do things that were in alignment with what I believe Jesus' will would have been. So just a challenge every day.
Don't knock everybody.
What?
Don't knock all the people. Remember who buried him.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a good one.
Yeah.
So there's a few of them. Okay.
Yeah, and there was a good one in that. So a member of the Sanhedrin did come around. So yeah, I don't think that's terrible. Friends, I've got a staff meeting we need to attend to, and going to let y'all go. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here, and what a joy. Thank you.
Thank